Take your things and leave, Naomi. You have nothing here.
That's what you think.
The estate transferred to Naomi Vaughn the night her mother died. That house is mine. No, Mr. Hartwell, you were only living in it.
Your mother was waiting for you to find this room. All this time, she never told me. She wanted you to know you were loved before you knew you were rich.
The night Naomi Hartwell came home from burying her mother, her husband was already replacing her. She stood at the iron gate in the dress she'd worn to the graveside, suitcase on the wet grass at her feet, and watched another woman's laughter move through the rooms that had never once belonged to him. He called it moving on. He called it starting over. What Marcus Hartwell did not know, what none of them knew, was that he had just locked the owner out of her own house. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. To understand what happened next, you have to go back to where the night began. Not to the marriage, but to the woman Marcus never once thought to ask about. The clouds over Atlanta had been low and heavy all afternoon, the kind that hold their breath before something breaks. Naomi stood at the tall iron gate of the estate she had lived in for 9 years. She still wore the black dress from the morning, the one she had chosen for the graveside service. Her eyes were dry, not from any absence of grief, but because a person can only weep so long before the well runs empty, and hers had emptied somewhere between the church and the cemetery gates. She wanted one simple thing: to go inside, slip off her shoes, sit in the dark, and let this terrible day finally be over. Instead, she found her husband waiting on the front steps with a glass in his hand. Marcus did not come down to meet her. He looked at her the way a man looks at a delivery he did not order and does not intend to sign for. Behind him, through the tall front windows, shapes moved through the rooms, boxes being stacked, arms lifting and setting down, and laughter. A woman's laughter, bright and easy, that Naomi did not recognize inside her own walls. "Marcus, baby," the woman called from somewhere inside. "The closet in the front bedroom is bigger. Have them move my things there." The woman appeared at the top of the steps a moment later. She wore a silk robe that was not hers, and carried herself with the ease of someone who had already measured the rooms and found them suitable. Her eyes drifted over Naomi the way a person glances at a water stain, registering it, then looking past it. "Is this her?" "This is Serena," Marcus said, and there was something almost proud in how he said it. "She lives here now." Naomi's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Lives here?" Marcus repeated it, savoring it. "Lives here." Serena tilted her head from the top step. "He told me all about you. The charity case, the one he married before he knew any better." She glanced at Naomi's left hand. "You can keep the ring, honey." "It's costume anyway." Naomi's fingers closed slowly around the band on her finger. She did not remove it, and she did not answer. She had learned long ago that the cruelest thing you can hand someone performing for a crowd is silence. Then came the third voice, the one that cut deepest because it wore the mask of family. Evelyn Hartwell appeared in the doorway, holding a clipboard she'd found somewhere, playing Lady of the Manor with the practiced authority of a woman who had spent decades deciding who belonged and who did not. She had never once warmed to Naomi in 9 years, and she had never bothered to hide it. Her son had married beneath himself, she liked to say, a girl whose mother rode the city bus and went unnoticed in every room she entered. "Don't let her stretch this out," Evelyn said, not to Naomi, but passed her to 2 hired men standing in the hall. "Take her things outside. If it doesn't fit in one suitcase, it stays." So, Naomi watched the man she had shared 1,000 meals with carry her suitcase down the front steps, and drop it on the wet grass. She looked only at Marcus. "I came back from my mother's funeral tonight, and now you're leaving," he said. "You walked into this marriage with nothing, a borrowed name, a borrowed roof, a mother, who went unnoticed her whole life. You walk out the way you walked in. Call it honest." Across the street, the porch light of Mr. Alderson's house clicked on. The old man had waved at Naomi every morning for 9 years. He stood at his railing now in a worn cardigan and watched a woman in mourning clothes be set out with the trash. He did not call across the road. He only shook his head, slow and heavy, the way a decent man does when he witnesses something he knows he will never forget. Serena noticed him and drew the silk a little tighter, suddenly aware of an audience. Evelyn did not so much as glance his way. Shame in her understanding was something that happened to other kinds of people. Marcus turned to go back inside. Naomi did not scream. She did not fall to her knees. She stood on the walk as the first fat drops of rain began to fall, and she looked at the great dark estate. Really looked at it, with the strange clarity that comes from seeing a familiar thing for what it actually is. Because there was a truth on the far edge of that porch that not one soul inside had guessed, and it was settling over everything like the rain, patient and inevitable. Then the door shifted. In the shadow of the hall stood Miss Clara, the woman who had run that household longer than Marcus, had owned a good suit, old, upright, with steady hands and a memory that reached back further than any of them imagined. She had watched everything from the corridor, and now she stepped forward, past Evelyn, past the woman in the borrowed robe. She walked down into the falling rain, took Naomi's cold hands in both of hers, and spoke 4 words that no one else stood close enough to hear. "You're finally home." Then the old woman turned her face toward the lit windows, toward the champagne, or toward the stranger celebrating inside, and the corner of her mouth lifted just slightly. The look of someone watching people dance on a floor she alone knows is about to give way. Naomi bent, lifted her own suitcase, and set her shoulders. She did not knock. She did not look back. She walked out through the iron gate and into the dark, and in her coat pocket her fingers found the small brass charm her mother had given her 22 years ago, warm against her palm, as if it had been waiting all along for this exact night. To understand why Marcus Hartwell never asked about his wife's mother, you have to understand the marriage. And to understand the marriage, you have to go back to where it began. They met at a charity auction in Midtown, 7 years before the lawn and the rain. Naomi was volunteering at the registration table, handing out paddles and programs with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had done this many times and found genuine satisfaction in small tasks done well. Marcus was there because his firm had purchased a table and the senior partners expected attendance. He spent the first hour scanning the room the way he scanned every room, measuring, calculating, and deciding who mattered and who was there to fill seats. He noticed Naomi because she was the only person in the room who was not trying to be noticed. He introduced himself. She smiled, handed him his paddle, and said the bidding would start at 7. He stood there a moment longer than was necessary. There was something in how she held herself, quiet without being diminished, that he could not immediately categorize, and Marcus was a man who preferred to have people categorized quickly. He found her again at the end of the evening. They talked for 40 minutes at a small table near the back, and she told him she worked in nonprofit consulting, helping small organizations with financial structure and grant applications. She was modest about it in a way that didn't feel like false modesty, just accuracy. He told her about his commercial real estate firm, his corner office, the portfolio he was building. She asked good questions. She listened to the answers the way people rarely did anymore. He called her 3 days later. She answered on the 3rd ring. The first 2 years of their marriage were, by the measure that counted for Marcus, successful. He was climbing. His firm was growing. The estate in Buckhead, where they lived under an arrangement he had never examined too closely, assuming it was somehow attached to a family trust and glad not to ask further, was exactly the right address. Naomi was steady beside him, easy in social situations, never demanding, never embarrassing. He was proud of her in the abstract way a man is proud of a good accessory that draws the right kind of attention. But something shifted around year 3, and it shifted the way these things always do, gradually, then all at once. His mother made it easier. Evelyn Hartwell had been cataloging Naomi's inadequacies since the day Marcus brought her home. Vivian Vaughn's daughter, she'd say in the way people use someone's origin as an insult. The woman who rode the city bus. Evelyn came from a family that had climbed the social register 3 generations ago, and had spent cent every year since then, worrying about falling back. She measured everyone, including her son, by the distance they'd traveled from the bottom, and Naomi, in her reading, had not traveled far enough. The comments were never loud, just consistent, and Marcus, who had always needed his mother's approval more than he was willing to admit, absorbed them the way still water absorbs color, slowly, evenly, until the whole surface has changed. Serena Calloway arrived at the firm 8 months ago. She came as a business development consultant, brought in for a 6-month contract to expand the firm's network in the commercial corridor. She was polished and deliberate, and knew exactly which attention to seek and which to defer. She had identified Marcus within her first week, successful enough to feel important, uncertain enough to need confirmation, and married to a woman he had quietly stopped seeing. By month 2, Marcus was finding reasons to stay late, Naomi noticed. She noticed the way a person notices a crack in a familiar wall, not with alarm at first, just the quiet registration of something new, the slight distraction in his eyes when he came home, a particular brand of cologne that hadn't been there before, a hotel keycard that fell out of a jacket in the wash, which she set on his nightstand without a word and without a question, because she had learned by then that the question wouldn't get her what she needed. She said nothing, she watched. What Marcus did not understand, what he had never thought to understand, was that Naomi's silence was not the silence of someone who had nowhere to go. It was the silence of someone who was waiting. She did not know yet what she was waiting for, only that something in her understood the timing was not right. There was one more thing Marcus did not know, had never thought to look for, and would not understand until it was far too late. For years he had complained about the parent company that owned his firm, a silent investment group, buried behind a holding company answering to no name he could ever dig up. He'd found it irritating. He liked to know who was above him, so he could position himself accordingly, and this organization had never given him that satisfaction. He had tried twice to trace it and hit dead ends both times. He eventually decided it was probably some anonymous family office or overseas consortium and stopped trying. He had never once thought to mention it to Naomi. Miss Clara saw all of it from the margins. The old housekeeper moved through those years the way she moved through every room in that house, steadily, without announcement, noticing everything. She had been with the household longer than the marriage. She had known Vivienne Vaughn long before Marcus learned her daughter's name. On an evening near the end of the 2nd year, when the house was quiet, and Naomi was sitting alone at the kitchen table with a cup of tea grown cold, Miss Clara sat down across from her without being invited, and held the younger woman's hand for a long moment without saying a word. Naomi looked up. How long have you known? Miss Clara's expression didn't change. Known what, honey? Naomi almost smiled. Whatever you're not saying. The old woman patted her hand once and stood up. Some things keep better when they're kept, she said, and carried the cold tea to the sink. The night before the funeral, the last night Naomi spent in that house, as a resident rather than a visitor, Marcus told her he needed space to think when she got back. He said it without quite meeting her eyes, and she understood from his phrasing that he had already made a decision, and was performing the consideration of it for her benefit. She said nothing. She went upstairs, packed a bag for the next morning, and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. Her fingers found the small brass charm in her coat pocket, the one her mother had pressed into her palm when she was 12, worn smooth at the edges, red ribbon faded to rust. She had carried it for 22 years without understanding why she couldn't leave it behind. Something in her chest went very still. Tomorrow she would bury her mother. She didn't know yet that she was about to find out who her mother actually was. Naomi spent the first night in a roadside motel off the interstate, listening to trucks pass in the rain and choosing over and over again not to call anyone. Her mother was in the ground. Her husband had set her suitcase on the wet grass. So she lay on the stiff bedspread in her funeral dress and let the numbness settle, that heavy gray weight where nothing hurts because nothing registers at all. She had known Vivienne Vaughn her entire life, and she was only beginning to understand how little that meant. To the world, Vivienne was a plain, gentle woman in simple dresses who took the early bus, kept to herself, and went quietly about her days. That was what Evelyn believed. That was what Marcus believed. It was near enough what Naomi herself had grown up believing, raised in a 2-room apartment on the east side, where the radiator clanked all winter, and her mother read to her by a lamp with a cracked shade. Vivienne could have handed her daughter the world. She handed her almost nothing instead, and she did it on purpose. Money makes people love you for the wrong reasons, Vivienne told Naomi once, on a slow Sunday afternoon when the girl was 8, sitting on the kitchen floor, while her mother braided her hair with unhurried hands. I want you loved for what's inside you, not for what's around you. You understand me? Naomi had said yes because she loved the sound of her mother's voice. She did not understand yet. She would spend the next 30 years learning what Vivienne had meant. On Naomi's 12th birthday, there was no bicycle, no party, no fine dress. Vivienne sat with her at the kitchen table and pressed something small and heavy into her daughter's palm, then folded the girl's fingers shut around it. It was a small brass charm on a faded red ribbon, worn smooth at the edges from years of being held. It looked like a piece of costume jewelry, the kind found in old boxes at estate sales, unremarkable to anyone who didn't look closely, but along one edge, cut into the metal where a careless eye would never notice, was the narrow tooth of a key. This is yours now, Vivienne said. One day it opens the only door that ever mattered. Until then you keep it on you, always. Promise me. A key to what, Mama? To everything I couldn't tell you yet. Her mother's eyes had gone wet and shining. Promise me you won't lose it, she promised. For 22 years she had carried that little brass charm, without once knowing it was a key at all. First on a chain at her throat, then in a small purse, and after she married, sewn carefully into the lining of an old coat where Marcus would never think to reach. Vivienne had lived small and given large. Whatever she had went out again to the church, to a neighbor whose heat had gone out, to the shelter 2 blocks over. When Naomi once brought home a friend from school whose shoes had worn completely through, Vivienne fed the girl, fitted her with a new pair from the closet, and took her own daughter aside afterward. You never let anybody feel small for what they don't have, she said. Not ever. You hear me? Naomi heard. She spent the rest of her life proving she had listened. This past year, Vivienne had begun to fail. The illness took her slowly, and near the end, she said things Naomi didn't know how to hold. Things that slipped between clarity and something else, between the mother she had always known, and a woman whose edges she had never seen. When I'm gone, Vivienne whispered one afternoon from the hospital bed, gripping Naomi's wrist with startling strength. Don't ever let that man tell you what you are. He doesn't know. He never knew. Use what I gave you. Go home. Home is right here with you, Mama, Naomi had said, smoothing the damp hair from her mother's brow. She thought it was the fever talking. She thought it was the medication loosening the boundaries between what was real and what the mind invented to make sense of what it feared. What she couldn't have known was that in those final weeks, Vivienne had tried again and again to reach her. She called the house from the hospital. She called when the clarity was good, and when it was not so good. She called 11 times, to the same number, because her daughter's voice was the one thing she needed before the door closed. Each time, someone answered. Each time, the message never arrived. The clarity would slip, the hours would blur, and then she would surface again and try once more. Naomi buried her mother, believing she had said her goodbye. She had not. Not the true one. She simply did not know it yet. She almost let the unknown number ring out the next morning. It was barely 7, the motel curtains thin against the pale light, and she had not slept. She stared at the screen for 3 rings, then answered. Mrs. Hartwell. The voice was old, precise, careful. The voice of a man who had spent his life choosing each word and setting it down with care. My name is Mr. Langston. I was your mother's attorney for 31 years. There are matters concerning Vivienne's estate that we must discuss in person privately and soon. It is more urgent than you can imagine. Naomi was quiet for a moment. Then, almost gently, my mother's estate, Mr. Langston. She rented a 2-room apartment. There's a savings account with maybe a month's rent in it. The line went silent for a long moment. Mrs. Hartwell, he said, how much did your mother ever tell you about her work? She kept the homes of wealthy families. Naomi paused, or at least that's what I understood. Another pause, longer than the first. Is that what she let you believe? Something cold turned over in Naomi's chest. She sat up on the stiff motel mattress. Outside, a truck pulled out of the lot, the engine loud and then fading. What are you telling me, Mr. Langston? I am telling you that your mother was not who the world took her for, and that you are not who your husband took you for, a beat. Come to my office. Bring anything she ever gave you, anything at all. Naomi's fingers moved to the coat hanging on the motel chair, and found the brass charm through the lining before she had consciously decided to reach for it. Across town, in the estate that still smelled of the lily arrangements from the week before, the celebrations was already beginning to curdle into something else. Because things were going wrong for Marcus Hartwell, and he could not understand why. The first letter arrived by courier the morning after the expulsion, official, sealed, bearing the return address of a law firm Marcus had never heard of. He read it standing at the kitchen counter, while Serena slept in the room he had rearranged for her. The letter confirmed that following the death of the grantor of the Vaughn family trust, beneficial and legal ownership of the property at the current address had transferred to the trust's named beneficiary, effective immediately. Marcus read it twice. He set it on the counter. He picked it up and read it again. He had always assumed, in the easy way a comfortable man assumes things, that the estate was in some vague sense theirs. It had never been. He and Naomi had been permitted to live there. He turned the phrase over in his mind and could not make it fit the shape of anything he understood about his own life. The beneficiary named in the letter was not him. He was still standing there when the bank called. Not to threaten, banks do not threaten men who look the way Marcus looked, in good suits, with good addresses, but to inform. A line of credit he had drawn against for several years now required reauthorization from the account holder of record. It had never rested on his name at all. The credit had been secured against the property itself, the estate held in the Vaughn family trust, and now that ownership had changed hands, the entire arrangement had frozen overnight. The voice on the phone was professional and patient, which somehow made it worse. Marcus thanked him and hung up. He sat down at the kitchen table. Through the tall window, the morning light lay across the lawn, where he had put Naomi's suitcase the night before. Even the financial confidence Marcus believed was his had been borrowed without his knowing from a woman he had dismissed for years. Evelyn arrived mid-morning with purpose. She had called ahead and found the gate code unchanged and let herself in, which she always did, and which Marcus had long since stopped noting. "It's that woman," she said, settling into her usual chair at the breakfast table, with the authority of someone who had never once been wrong about anything important. "She's doing this because she's bitter. She filed some paperwork to cause trouble before she left. The paperwork says the estate isn't ours, Mama. That can't be right. The bank called this morning." Evelyn was quiet for a moment, which was unusual for her. "Call a lawyer," she said. "Call several. You are the man of this family. Handle it." Marcus looked at her. "I don't know who to call," he said. "I don't even know who owns the ground we're standing on." She stared at him as though he had said something in a language she did not speak, and for the first time in his life she had no answer to offer. She looked away first, which she had also never done before. Serena had been listening from the doorway. She was nobody's fool. It would be a mistake to think otherwise. She had run her own arithmetic before she ever introduced herself to Marcus at that firm event 8 months ago. She had looked at a man with a corner office, who lived in an estate that seemed far grander than his salary should have afforded, and she had made assumptions. Now those assumptions were being revised in real time, and Serena had a talent for revising quickly. She poured herself coffee, set the pot down, and watched Marcus sit at a table that might not be his in a house that apparently wasn't. The memo from his firm arrived that afternoon, a formal notice that the parent company would be conducting a leadership review over the coming weeks. He skimmed it, set it aside. He had no attention left for institutional reviews. He did not notice that the parent company's name, a holding company he had spent years trying to identify, appeared 3 times in the first paragraph. Naomi, meanwhile, sat in the clean office of Langston and Associates on the 15th floor downtown, and listened to a measured, careful man explain things to her in a voice that held both precision and kindness in equal parts. She had brought the old coat. The brass charm was in her hand, Mr. Langston was tall and silver-haired, with the deliberate manner of a man who had spent 3 decades keeping a very large secret and had learned to carry it without showing the weight. He set a thin folder on the table, then a thicker one, then a third. "Your mother was my client for 31 years, he said. "In all that time she asked me to protect one thing above every other. Not from the law, whose demands she met in full and on time, but from the world, and from you until the proper hour." Naomi's hands were still. "What hour is this?" "The hour she hoped would come," he said. The hour she feared might not come soon enough. He told her about the apartment building on the east side, a failing property Vivienne had purchased 32 years ago with the settlement from a car accident that had taken her husband before Naomi could walk. She repaired it herself over the course of a summer with tools and manuals and a stubbornness that Langston, who had been her attorney since the beginning, found the most remarkable thing he had ever witnessed in 30 years of practice. Then she bought another, then another. Naomi listened. The brass charm was warm in her palm. That evening, a formal letter arrived at the estate by courier, addressed to Marcus Hartwell and Evelyn Hartwell, and to anyone residing in the household. Per the explicit written instruction of the deceased, their presence was required at the reading of the will of Vivienne Vaughn at the offices of Langston and Associates at 10 o'clock on Thursday morning. Marcus read it standing at the counter in the same spot where he had read the first letter that morning. "What does it mean?" Serena asked from the doorway. "It means we go," Evelyn said before Marcus could answer. She straightened up from the table, "and we make sure whatever that woman arranged doesn't stand." That night, Marcus sat alone in the study, long after the others had gone up. He was still there at midnight, staring at the courier notice, as though the paper might change its mind. When Serena came down, she poured a glass of water, set it near him, not gently. "Whose name is on this house, Marcus?" Every trace of warmth had left her voice. It was a very different voice from the one she'd used at the charity dinners and the late evenings at the office. This was the voice beneath that voice, and it was doing arithmetic. He didn't answer. He didn't have one. A man who does not know the ground beneath his feet, Serena had learned a long time ago, was a man already falling. The only question was whether you were still standing close enough to fall with him. The conference room at Langston and Associates sat on the 40th floor, glass on every side, with the whole sprawl of Atlanta lying far below in the morning light. It was the kind of room designed to make things feel settled and official, where the weight of what was said would be absorbed by leather chairs and polished glass, rather than carried out into the street. Mr. Langston had chosen it deliberately. He had been choosing details deliberately for 31 years where Vivienne Vaughn was concerned. There were more people in the room than a simple family reading should have required. Two men in careful suits flanked the far wall. A woman with a leather portfolio sat near the window. A court reporter had set up at the corner of the table, and along the back wall, upright in a plain dark dress, stood Miss Clara. Marcus frowned the moment he saw her. "Why is the housekeeper here?" Mr. Langston looked up from the leather folder he was opening. "Miss Clara is present at the specific request of the deceased. As are you, Mr. Hartwell." A pause, quiet and deliberate. "Please sit." They sat. Marcus and Evelyn on one side of the long table, their attorney beside them. Serena had arrived uninvited. Langston had glanced at her once, then allowed it, which told Naomi more about the scope of what was coming than anything else could have. Naomi took the last chair near the window, her hands folded in her lap, the brass charm in the pocket of her coat. Langston opened the folder and let the room settle. "Vivienne Vaughn was my client for 31 years. His voice was measured, unhurried. In all that time, she asked me to protect one secret above every other. Not from the law, whose demands she met to the penny, but from the world, and from her own daughter until the proper hour. That hour has come." He looked at Naomi, and his old eyes softened for a moment. Then he returned to the folder. "Your mother did not clean houses, Mrs. Hartwell." Marcus made a small sound, not quite a laugh, but close. "She took the city bus." "She took the city bus because she liked the people on it," Langston said without looking up. "She also owned the building the route began in. The room was very still." Langston turned a page. 32 years ago, a young widow with a newborn daughter took a small settlement, the proceeds of an insurance claim following her husband's death, and purchased one failing apartment building on the east side of this city. She repaired it over the course of a summer largely with her own hands. She rented the units at fair prices. Then she bought another building, and another. Marcus had found his voice again. "That's very touching. How many did she end up with?" 3, 4? Langston looked at him for a moment. The look was not unkind. It was simply the look of a man who knows what is coming, and has watched people underestimate it many times before. 14,000, he said. Give or take. Across the southeast, Evelyn's clipboard slid from her lap. It clattered against the floor. No one bent to pick it up. That is only the residential portfolio. Langston turned another page. Your mother also held a controlling interest in a regional bank. She held commercial properties across 6 states, office buildings, logistics facilities, land. She controlled a dozen holding companies, stacked one inside another so that her name never once appeared, where the public could read it, because she wanted no man to ever love her daughter for the size of what she carried. He set a document flat on the glass table. She also owned, through these structures, a controlling interest in a commercial real estate firm headquartered in this city, one that has operated under various parent company names, none of which were recognizable to anyone outside the inner management circle she established. Marcus had gone still. Something in the way Langston said commercial real estate firm had caught in his chest like a hook. Which firm, he said. Langston named it, the name of Marcus's employer. The company he had complained about for years, the faceless parent he could never identify, the silent ownership that had always managed to stay one level above anything he could reach. Marcus stared at him. That's my firm. It was your mother-in-law's firm, Langston said. Has been for 11 years. You have been drawing your salary, your bonuses, your expense accounts, and your performance reviews from the estate of the woman you believed rode the bus, and stayed in her lane. No one in the room moved. The court reporter's hands had paused over the keys. Even the Atlanta skyline through the glass seemed to hold itself. Evelyn's face had gone gray. Serena was looking at the door. The full picture, Langston said. He set a single page flat at the center of the table, and every person in that room looked at the number on it. Across the Vaughn Group's trusts, banks, land holdings, commercial interests, and controlling shares, the estate is currently valued at approximately $1.18 trillion. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Understand me plainly. That is not money resting in any single account. It is land, buildings, banks, shares, and controlling stakes spread across decades of deliberate, patient construction. Your mother counted her life in what she built, not in cash. To put the scale within reach, Mr. Hartwell, a lifetime of your salary would not cover a single week of what it all earns while it sleeps. Marcus's smile had frozen on his face like something painted there. Evelyn had gone the color of ash. The clipboard was still on the floor. She did not appear to notice. She was looking at nothing in particular, which was new. Serena stood without a word. She gathered her coat and her portfolio, and walked toward the door with the particular economy of a woman who has already moved on before she has physically the room. She was the only person in that glass space, quick enough to run, while running was still an option, and she had the presence of mind to take it. The heavy door closed behind her with a sound like finality, and in the chair near the window, Naomi reached into her coat and drew out the small brass charm, worn smooth red ribbon faded to rust, and set it on the glass table. It slid a few inches and came to a stop at the center. My mother gave me this when I was 12, she said. Her voice was very steady. She said it opened the only door that ever mattered. I carried it for 22 years without knowing it was a key. She looked at Langston. What does it open? The old man's throat worked. He looked at the charm on the table with something in his face that was not quite grief and not quite relief, but something between the two, the expression of a man who has been holding a secret at a great cost for a very long time and is finally, carefully setting it down. Your mother's private study, he said, on the top floor of the estate, the one room she always kept locked. It holds her papers, her ledgers, and a letter she wrote in the last month of her life. A pause. A letter she was never able to deliver. Naomi looked at him. Never able to deliver, she repeated. There was a silence, and in it, the shape of something worse than everything that had come before began to form. She tried to reach you, Langston said. The room was very quiet. Outside the glass, Atlanta went about its morning, traffic, a delivery truck, pigeons on a ledge. Indifferent to what was being said 40 floors above it. In her final weeks, your mother called your residence from the hospital. She called when the clarity was good, and she called when it was not so good. She needed to speak to you privately. Every time someone answered, every time the call ended without the message reaching you, Naomi heard the words. She heard them with the clarity that sometimes comes when the mind already suspected the shape of a thing, and now is only being shown the outline made definite. What do you mean? The message never reached me. Langston reached into the leather case beside him and drew out a slim folder. He opened it and turned it to face the room. The telephone records exist. They are detailed, and they are not in dispute. He held Naomi's gaze for a moment before looking briefly, deliberately at Marcus. 11 calls, all to the same number, all answered, all within the final 3 weeks of Vivian Vaughn's life. None of them resulted in a return call or a message passed on to her daughter. Marcus leaned forward in his chair. His voice came out with the careful reasonableness of a man trying to reshape a situation before it finishes forming around him. Those could be anyone's calls. She was heavily medicated. She was confused. Patients in her condition often dial wrong numbers, call the same number repeatedly without 11 times, Mr. Hartwell, Langston said. To the same number, each one answered. A sound like something settling. Not loud, more like the last piece of a floorboard finally giving way beneath years of pressure. Marcus looked down at the table. Evelyn had been very still for a long time. Her face had not recovered its color. She looked for the first time in Naomi's memory, like a woman who had encountered something her certainties could not arrange into a shape she recognized. No one else in the room spoke. Naomi looked at her husband. She had not looked at him directly since she sat down. She looked at him now, at the line of his jaw, the particular way he held his shoulders when he was managing something, the hands that were very still, and flat against the table. She had looked at this face across 1,000 breakfasts and 1,000 dinners. She had looked at it in good weather and in ordinary weather, and now she looked at it in this. Her calm broke, not into rage, not into the kind of fury that raises a voice and fills a room, into something far worse, for a man who had lived 9 years beside her and had never once understood what she was made of, something quieter and more total, grief, clean and unarmored, without any wall between it and the room. She called, Naomi said. Her voice was low. It did not waver, which somehow made it worse. My mother was dying, and she called our house because she wanted to say goodbye to me, and you answered. You stood in our kitchen and you answered, and then you erased her. A beat, because you were afraid of what she knew. Because you understood, even when I did not, that she saw you clearly, and you couldn't let her tell me. Marcus said nothing. His silence was the loudest confession that Glass Room had ever held. Langston set a second sheet flat on the table, the property document he had prepared for exactly this moment. The Vaughn Family Trust held the estate in Buckhead from a period predating your marriage by several years, Mrs. Hartwell. You and Mr. Hartwell were permitted to reside there as occupants of the trust's property. At no point did either of you hold ownership. Not a room of it. Not a square foot of the grounds. He looked at Marcus. On the night Vivian Vaughn died, the trust distributed its primary residential asset to the named beneficiary, outright in her name alone, with no encumbrance and no condition. The transfer was automatic and irrevocable under the trust instrument. He paused. You have been the rightful owner of that property, Mrs. Hartwell, since the very night your husband put your suitcase on the lawn. Miss Clara, from her place along the back wall, did not move. But her eyes went to Naomi with the quiet expression of a woman who has been holding this for years and is now finally permitted to set it down. Marcus Hartwell had not thrown his wife out of his house. He had thrown the owner out of hers. The realization moved across the room like a slow tide, reaching the men in suits at the far end, the woman with the portfolio, the court reporter who had stilled her hands again. Every person in that room arrived at the same understanding in the same moment. And then everyone looked at Marcus. He felt it. He had nowhere to put his eyes, so he kept them on the table. And he stayed very still, the way a man stays still when he understands at last the size of what he has done, and knows there is nothing to be gained from motion. Naomi reached for the brass charm at the center of the table and closed her hand around it. She felt the narrow tooth of it against her palm, the hidden key she had carried without knowing for 22 years. She thought about her mother sitting at the hospital phone, dialing, waiting through the rings, hearing the voice of her son-in-law telling her that Naomi was unavailable, would call back later, was busy, was resting, all the small plausible lies a man tells when he needs a door to stay closed. She thought about Vivian setting the receiver down, waiting for the clarity to hold long enough to try again, trying again, 11 times, She rose from her chair. The room was very still. "Get out of my house," she said, low and even, with nothing beneath it but the fact of it all of you, by tonight. She did not look at Marcus again. She picked up the brass charm, held it in her fist, and turned to the window, to Atlanta below in its ordinary morning, going nowhere and everywhere all at once. Behind her, the room began the slow and irreversible process of rearranging itself around the truth. The arithmetic of what they had taken was unbearable, and she made herself bear it anyway, right there in front of all of them. She made herself bear it without once looking away. Serena had the gate code. She had a house key she'd been given in the first week, during the flurry of move in logistics that Marcus had coordinated with the confidence of a man who believed he was settling into something permanent. No one had thought to change the locks. In the chaos of the hours that followed the will reading, the calls, the attorneys, the formal notices moving through various offices, the estate had been briefly, functionally, unattended. Serena drove there directly from the 40th floor. She let herself in through the side entrance. She went straight to the master bedroom, which she had spent 6 weeks making her own, and packed her things in 10 minutes with the efficiency of a woman who had always kept a mental list of what was hers. Then she opened the tall dresser on Vivienne's side of the room, the old items that had come with the house, things no one had catalogued, and found a velvet case in the back of the top drawer. Inside it, jewelry. Pieces with the quiet, heavy presence of things that had been chosen for lasting value rather than display. She did not pause. She put the case under her arm, walked through the kitchen, and was out the side door, and back in her car before the taillights of anyone else turned onto the street. Weeks later, when Langston told Naomi the estate could pursue Serena, could trace the pieces, could bring charges, had a reasonable case. Naomi sat with the information for a long moment. She looked at the window. Outside, the lawn was returning to itself, the grass growing back evenly over the marks left by the suitcase and the hired movers. "No," she said. Langston waited. "Chasing that woman means giving her another year of my life," Naomi said. "She has taken enough of my days. Let her keep the rest." It was not weakness. It was not quite mercy either. It was a woman deciding, deliberately and precisely, where her own attention would be spent. Marcus's fall came faster and landed harder than it might have, because he had spent years making small decisions that collectively became a portrait of a man no institution wanted to keep. The parent company of his firm, the one he had complained about for years, the faceless entity he had tried twice to trace and abandoned as unknowable, had always been a subsidiary of the Vaughn Group. He had drawn his salary, his bonuses, his inflated expense reimbursements, and his annual performance review from the estate of the woman he had once told her own daughter she was nothing more than a good address. For 9 years, without knowing, Naomi made no calls. She issued no instructions. She did not reach down from whatever height she now occupied to crush him. What happened was simpler and more his own doing. When the will reading became known, or as it became known the way things become known in a city where legal matters of this scale have ripples, the firm's compliance officers looked more carefully at Marcus Hartwell's expense accounts. What they found was not dramatic, just relentless. Expense reports padded over years with small personal costs, hotel stays for Serena, categorized as client entertaining, car rentals charged to the company account, a collection of minor liberties he had assumed no one important was tracking. The kind of thing a comfortable man does when he believes no one at the top is paying attention to the details. Once the parent company understood precisely whose daughter his discarded wife had turned out to be, the reputational arithmetic was straightforward. A man who had intercepted the dying calls of his mother-in-law, thrown his grieving wife onto a lawn, moved a mistress into a home that was never his, and padded his expense accounts. For years was a liability the Vaughn Group had no interest in absorbing. His position was terminated for cause within the month. A woman from the parent company, someone who had worked with Vivienne's estate managers for years, sat across from him in the conference room and walked him through his own conduct, line by line, with the patience of someone who had done this before and would do it again. She thanked him coolly for his years of service. She slid the termination documents across the table and waited. He hired a lawyer. When the lawyer read the trust documents, the man returned Marcus' retainer without comment and declined the case. He hired a second attorney. The second attorney explained to him, in detail, why the prenuptial agreement he had signed in the 3rd month of his engagement, signed in a hurry without reading it carefully. Certain he was getting the better end of an arrangement with a woman who had nothing, had in fact sealed him out completely from any interest in any Vaughn asset, now or in future. He had laughed at that prenup. He had laughed at it in front of Naomi and told her it was theater, that she was being overly cautious, that whatever was hers was practically his anyway. She had said nothing. He came to the estate one last time, on a Wednesday afternoon, to collect his personal belongings. The rooms felt different. He could not have explained why, exactly, except that the house seemed to have settled into its actual relationship with its actual owner, and he felt this without being able to name it. In the emptied front hall, with Miss Clara waiting at the far end of the corridor and the sound of the whole silent house around him, Marcus found the one thing left to him, the cruelty of the final word. "You want the truth," he said. His voice was very calm. "I never loved you, not one day. I married you because your mother handed us a beautiful place to live for almost nothing. And I liked the man it made me look like in front of everyone. That's all you ever were, a good address." Naomi had long suspected it. She had constructed a version of it in her mind during the long, quiet years. But hearing it in his voice, in his own words, in the front hall of her own house, still took something from her that no inheritance could restore. Because some part of every person holds on to the belief that they were loved once, truly, or if only briefly, and he had reached in and taken that from her too. She did not answer him. She walked to the front door and opened it, and stood beside it, and she waited. He gathered what remained of his dignity, and walked out into the same gray afternoon that she had once stood in with a suitcase at her feet. She closed the door. Evelyn Hartwell did not go to prison. Pride is not a crime the law can address directly, but she lost the one thing she had constructed her life around, the certainty that she stood above the girl her son had chosen. She moved into a small rented apartment in a neighborhood she would not have visited before, and she told whoever would sit still long enough a version of events in which she was the aggrieved party. Fewer people sat still each year. The justice Naomi cared about was not the theatrical kind. It was smaller and more real, the quiet, durable fact that the people who had dismissed her were now living with the knowledge of how wrong they had been, and that the knowledge had no expiration date. Miss Clara that evening found Naomi in the kitchen and stood for a moment in the doorway. "She wanted you to go upstairs," the old woman said. "When you're ready, I'll come with you." Naomi set down her cup and nodded. They went upstairs together, the two of them, one careful step at a time, through the house that had always been hers, and only now felt entirely like it. The hall on the top floor of the estate was long and narrow, lit by sconces that cast a warm amber light against the old wood paneling. Naomi had walked this hall hundreds of times over 9 years. On the way to the storage room at the end, on the way back, barely glancing at the doors she passed. There was one door she had always noted without quite registering it. Plain wood at the far end, no particular distinction from the others except that it was never open and she had never in 9 years been given a reason to try it. Miss Clara stopped outside it now. The old woman stood for a moment with her hand resting on the frame, not quite touching the door. She seemed to be arranging something inside herself, the precise ordering of what needed to be said. "I came to work for your mother," she began. "Before you could walk, before there was any Marcus, any Evelyn, any of what came after. Your mother found me at a point in my own life when I had very little, and she offered me this work and this house, and more respect than most people earn in a lifetime. She trusted me." Miss Clara's eyes were steady in the amber light. "She trusted me with the one thing she trusted no lawyer or bank with, to watch over you and to hold my tongue until the right day came." Naomi waited. "She stood right where you're standing," the old woman said. "More evenings than I can count, she'd come up here and just stand at that window at the end of the hall, looking down at the lawn, watching how they treated you. It near broke her. Your mother was not a woman who showed what it cost her, but I knew the cost. I've known it for years." Miss Clara's voice softened slightly, not with sentimentality, but with the weight of things that are simply true. She believed that love which survives, having nothing, is the only kind that lasts. She had to know whether yours would. Whether you were someone who could hold herself together when the world was telling her she had no right to stand straight. A pause, and you were. You always were. She stepped back from the door. My Naomi is the richest thing these hands ever made, she said. She used to tell me that, in that exact voice. She used to say, she doesn't even know it. She meant it as the highest compliment she knew how to give. Naomi looked at the door. Her hand found the brass charm in her pocket, warm as it always was, as if it had been resting against something living all these years. She lifted it on its faded ribbon. Her hand shook once, just once. Then she brought the narrow tooth of the hidden key to the lock and turned it, and the door opened as smoothly and easily as if it had been waiting for no one else. The study smelled of paper and old cedar and something else, something she recognized from childhood without being able to name it precisely. The particular scent of her mother's coat, the inside of her mother's bag, the papers her mother kept in the old desk in the two-room apartment on the east side. It was the smell of Vivienne. A single chair sat behind the desk, its arms worn soft from years of late nights no one had ever seen her keep. Ledgers filled every shelf, not randomly, but in the ordered way of someone who understood that what she was building needed to be tracked and tended decade by decade, that the work required attention and patience and the willingness to show up every day without anyone knowing you were there. There were folders labeled in handwriting Naomi recognized immediately. Documents going back to the early years, the first apartment building, the first bank statements, the first mod loan repayment record, from a time when the whole enterprise fit in a single box. And on the desk, propped against a lamp, stood a single envelope, white, sealed, written in the same handwriting as the folders, in the deliberate and slightly careful script of a woman, who had gone to school in a time when handwriting was taught as a serious discipline. It read, "For Naomi, when you are ready." The lamp had a cracked shade. Naomi recognized it immediately. The same lamp from the apartment, the one Vivienne had carried out when they left that two-room place on the east side. She had carried it to every home after, the way some people carry a particular mug or a particular photograph, not because it was valuable, but because it was true. Naomi lowered herself into her mother's chair. The leather was soft under her hands, warm in the way things get warm, when they have been held by the same body for long enough. She broke the seal on the envelope and read, "I will not read all of it here. Some letters belong to one person alone, and this one belongs entirely to Naomi. What I can tell you is that it was everything her mother had tried 11 times to say from a hospital phone, the full version, uninterrupted, with nothing standing between them." The letter told her why. It told her what Vivienne had seen, and what she had feared, and what she had hoped. It told her about the first building, the second building, the bank loan she'd paid off a year early, the first time she'd sat in a boardroom, and the man across the table had underestimated her, and how she had used that against him. It told her about the choice to stay invisible, not from shame, but from the understanding that visibility would change how people saw her daughter, before her daughter had a chance to become herself. It told her that the brass key had been cut in the first year, set in the charm by a jeweler sworn to silence, because Vivienne had wanted Naomi to carry the way in with her always, even when she didn't know she was carrying it, and at the end, the final line. "You were never poor a single day of your life, baby. You just had a mother who loved you too much to let you know how rich you already were. Come home now. The door was always yours." Naomi wept, not the dry, gutted grief of the lawn, the kind that has run out of somewhere to go and sits inside the body like stones. The other kind. The kind that has finally found somewhere to go and moves through you like a tide going out, taking with it something heavy that you had been carrying so long you forgot it was there. She sat in her mother's chair for a long time. Miss Clara waited outside the door without knocking. The house was quiet around them both. Naomi did not sell what her mother built. She runs it now, the buildings, the bank, the commercial properties, the long web of holding companies her mother had spent 3 decades constructing, so carefully that its full shape was only visible from the inside. She runs it the way Vivienne ran it. Plainly, without announcement, with attention paid to the details that the public never sees. Her name has appeared in a few trade publications over the past year, as these things eventually surface, but she has not sought the attention, and she does not hold press conferences, and the journalists, who have tried to arrange profiles have found her office politely but firmly unavailable. Sometimes she takes meetings from the back seat of a city bus. Not because she has to, because she wants to. Because her mother was right that there's a particular honesty about that particular vantage point, the way the city looks when you're moving through it at the speed everyone else moves, or with the same stops, and the same waits, and the same people around you. And because sitting where Vivienne used to sit makes the whole enterprise feel continuous rather than inherited. She is not starting something new. She is continuing something that began 32 years ago with a settlement check and a failing building, and a woman with more stubbornness than anyone knew what to do with. The apartment building on the east side, the first one, the one Vivienne repaired that first summer with her own hands, Naomi had it restored the following spring. Not renovated, restored. She found the original architectural plans in the study, filed in a folder dated the same year, or as Naomi's birth, and she used them as the guide. The building now houses 46 families paying fair rents in a neighborhood where fair rents had become uncommon. There is a small plaque by the main entrance. It bears one name, Vivienne. She kept the old two-room apartment on the east side as well. Not as an office, not as a showpiece. She kept it because it was the first place she understood herself clearly. Because the walls there knew the sound of her mother's voice reading to her by lamplight, and because some mornings when the weight of what she's running feels abstract and enormous, she goes back and sits by the window where they used to sit and lets herself remember the scale of things when they were small. The radiator still clanks in winter. She has never had it fixed. Miss Clara remained at the estate. Not as a housekeeper, the word had always been insufficient for what she was, but as the person who knew the house best, and whose presence in it was older than any of the trouble that had passed through it. Naomi set up a room for her on the main floor and adjusted everything so that the arrangements of the household served Miss Clara's comfort rather than the other way around. When people ask who Miss Clara is, Naomi says, family, because that is what she is. Every evening before she goes to bed, Naomi goes to her mother's study. She turns on the lamp, the one with the cracked shade, the one that moved from the east side apartment to the study on the top floor, the one that Vivienne had kept on her desk through 3 decades of late nights, building something vast and quiet. She turns it on and she leaves it burning. The way you keep a porch light on for someone you love who has not yet made it home. There are things she has not been able to stop thinking about. One of them is the shape of her own ignorance. The way she walked through 9 years of her life in a house that was hers without knowing it, sitting at a breakfast table that was hers, being dismissed in rooms that were hers, and never knowing. She wonders sometimes what she would have done differently if she had known. Whether she would have stayed, whether she would have been the same. She thinks more often about what her mother knew that she didn't. That a person who knows their own value does not require the room to know it also. That the most dangerous thing in any space is often the one who is not performing. That a woman who has spent her life being underestimated has a particular kind of patience that looks, from the outside, like resignation, and is from the inside something entirely different. The world will keep telling you that you are worth exactly what you can be seen to hold. The people who love you for your address, for your title, for the number behind your name, they will leave the instant the address changes, and they will tell themselves they left for good reasons, and they will almost believe it. What you are worth in those moments is exactly what you were worth before. Everything you have built in yourself and nothing else. Guard the people who stay when your hands are empty. They are not common. They are the only fortune that was ever real. Naomi thinks about this most evenings, sitting in her mother's chair, or in the quiet study at the top of the estate, with the lamp burning beside her and the whole sleeping city outside the window. She thinks about a woman who rode the city bus and owned the building the route began in, or who braided her daughter's hair on slow Sundays and told her the thing that took 30 years to understand, who tried 11 times to say goodbye and was turned away 11 times and kept the letter instead, because she understood that some things arrive by the route they were always meant to take. The door was always hers. It just needed the right key and the right hour, and a woman patient enough to wait for both. If this story left something with you, If it moved something in you that you want to name, leave one word in the comments. Home. So I know you walked every step of this road alongside Naomi. And if you want to hear the next one, subscribe. Because the quietest person in the room is very often the one holding the key.